Hello and welcome everyone to the Solo Multimedia Podcast, where I give you my unfiltered takes straight off the cuff. And today I'm going to be talking about the new video game Sifu. I forget what the company is called. I was going to say by the studio, blah blah blah, but I can't remember. I know they made Absolver a few years ago though, which was a game that always looked somewhat interesting to me. It got compared to Dark Souls a lot, but it was like a hand-to-hand melee kind of combat game. Um, it had a pretty striking art style as well, and I think a lot of those elements I've just described carried over into Sifu. This is essentially like a hand-to-hand martial art action RPG, um, and it has a lot of those kind of like it has a lot of the elements carried over from Absolver. I think one of the things is the art direction for sure. In Sifu, the whole thing, it looks great for the record, just before I actually describe it. It's a really striking art style. I didn't initially really like it that much. I thought it looked maybe the tiniest bit too simplistic, but over time I've really appreciated how they use it. But essentially, the way it looks is like all the models are fairly simple, kind of cartoony, with like lots of really like almost fairly sharp polygons, but all of the colors are fairly muted, even though they're quite vibrant at the same time. So for example, you won't get any like particularly detailed like layers of colors that all bleed into each other and make ultra detailed textures. Instead, you get fairly like simple, I don't want to say cell shaded because that's not what this is, but almost borderline cell shaded kind of like palettes where it's like one simple color for a large part of the texture, and it's all used to a pretty great effect, honestly, especially in some of the more kind of strange or surreal moments. But like I said at the start, ultimately, the art style is really good and quite clean. It does a good job of conveying all the information you need to see, which is a very good thing for sure, because the game, like I said, is a hand-to-hand, like kung fu or martial art focused, like action RPG or 3D action game, basically. And one of the interesting things with this game is the core um, idea is that basically you are just some random kid of like a kung fu teacher or kung fu family or something like that, and at the very start of the game you're actually put into the shoes of a group of people that end up going to a house and killing this kid's family. Basically, you play as like the raiders of the house at the start of the game. And then after they kill like the granddad, who's kind of like the final boss of this section or segment of the game, you come out of the like of a cupboard you're hiding in as a kid, and you end up getting this kind of like bizarre talisman or like little necklace thing that has a bunch of kind of like golden rings or coins on it. And basically throughout the game, the way it works is this is like a magical talisman, and whenever you die in the game, you basically you can use this talisman to essentially revive yourself exactly where you fell, but you age a couple of years. And the way they do that mechanic is every time you die on the level, your death counter ticks up, and when you die in that particular instance, you get added onto your age the number that the death counter is on. So say you've died twice and you're 25, you'll die at 25 and go to 27. There's ways to kind of like reset this counter, but overall I think it's a really interesting mechanic, and the idea is that the older you get, I would assume, I haven't actually hit the top age yet, but I think once you hit a certain age you can't continue anymore. You're too old to continue your quest to get revenge on all the people that killed your family. And also it provides like a kind of weird, almost like time bomb aspect to the game, but it does actually go quite a ways to solving something that I think is kind of a problem, an unspoken about problem in video games. Like I think death in most games can often be quite boring. A lot of the times it's just retry the same section again until you can beat it. I get why it's there. You need to have a level of challenge in video games. You need to have a level of, like something to overcome. You need something that will halt the player's progress if they do badly, like a way to punish the players. But oftentimes I feel like death just ends up meaning you just have to try something over a bunch of times, even if you can most like do it, like the majority of it you can do, I guess. So I think this is an interesting like almost meta layer to the game, because the other thing as well is as you defeat enemies you get XP, and you can use that XP to learn new moves, new combos, and all that kind of stuff. But once you like give up on a whole level, you actually lose all of your XP and everything. And giving up is the only way to reset your age back to where it was at the start of the level. And you start at like 20 or something. So after the first level, you can choose to kind of like, you don't have to like complete the level. Essentially, you can choose to just die and then reset the whole thing, but you lose all your XP and all your moves at that point, unless you choose to permanently unlock them, but that costs a lot more XP. So that's kind of the dynamic at play. And one thing I'll say about the game, actually, just again, this is based on first impressions. I've only played it for about 2 hours. I've beat the first level, and I've gotten through about half of the second level. There's about 5 levels in the game, I think. So there's 5 like bosses you're after. But the first level was really fucking cool. There were lots of kind of unique environments to fight enemies in. I particularly liked the boss battle at the end. So basically what it is the first level you have, you're kind of going towards almost like a warehouse. It's like a very grungy, like street themed, and this warehouse is producing like some form of drugs. It's like I guess a whole gang kind of scene. So a lot of the environments you fight in have these kind of like really like interesting kind of bamboo structures, forming a majority of the kind of like obstacles across the level, and you have lots of like bamboo shoots acting as like staircases and stuff like that, so there's a little bit of verticality to it as well. But the final boss is an incredibly cool fight and definitely shows a lot of what the game is capable of. Which, for the record, I will say the combat system, I haven't really spoken much about it, but it's actually really quite interesting. You have the usual stuff you would expect from like a Sekiro type game. So you can parry, you can block, you've got different types of attacks, you've got different combos you can use. But one of the interesting things as well is you can actually parry in different ways. You've got like ways to parry down to dodge different attacks like that are going high. You've got ways you can lift your foot up to dodge low attacks. You've got, just like I said, a regular parry will block any attack if you time it properly. You can block if you want. You've got defensive options, so instead of, if an enemy's coming at you, you don't have to just choose to parry them all the time. You can use a palm strike to push them back. You can do leg sweeps and things like that. So you've got a good load of options in the fighting, and it all feels quite fluid and definitely feels like there's a lot of depth to it. I will say this game is fairly tough, and I sucked at it for the first hour for sure. Maybe even a bit longer than that, really. I only really started to get a hang of it towards the end of my first session. So yeah, there's definitely a lot here. But what I will say is that one of the issues is I think the game has a tendency to throw more enemies at you than I think the combat system can really afford a lot of the time. I mean, most of the time you'll only have a couple enemies coming at you, but even still, it can sometimes feel a little bit overwhelming. And like when you'll parry one person, but then another person's attacking straight after. So how do you parry that person? You have got a button to dodge with, so you can always just jump out the way, and that seems to be like a reasonable solution a lot of the time. But at the same time, it can just feel like a bit of a clusterfuck, and I definitely think this game shines when you're dealing with like maybe 3 or 4 enemies at most, and they're all fairly tough with like interesting attack patterns. But yeah, that's like the majority of the game. You'll be running from like, from scene to scene, fighting a whole bunch of different enemies. There's going to be some bigger enemies, some smaller ones, larger groups, bosses, like mini bosses even. The 2 settings I've covered so far were like the back alley streets of like this drug kind of like operation, and then the second level is set in a club, so it's like neon lit, pumping music, that kind of thing. So far the variety has been there, especially considering these levels aren't particularly long, so you really get a chance to play them as much as you want and try and like beat them with the youngest age, I guess, which is probably going to be important. I still kind of sucked, and the best I could achieve on the first level after trying it, maybe 3 or 4 times, was like 33. So that's going from age 20 to 33. So it seems pretty bad, but it's hard to say at this point whether that is actually that bad or not. I have no idea. The combat is difficult, but there's a lot to chew on for sure. So I think that's really cool. It occasionally does some interesting homages as well. Like on the first level, I won't spoil what the scene actually is, but there's a really cool homage to a very famous Korean revenge action film. I'm sure many of you will know exactly what I mean just by saying that, but for those of you who don't, just enjoy that scene. I'm sure you'll realise what it is when you see it, at least if you've seen the film. Yeah, there's just a good random variety, a lot of action, cool game. I'm having a lot of fun with it so far, I'll say that much. But yeah, that's pretty much everything I have to say. I think if you're in the market for a, yeah, like just a good old beat 'em up game with maybe not a ton of content, but like very high quality content, then I would definitely recommend this game. It's really, really well presented. For sure. Like the atmosphere is really cool, the music's really cool, the art style's really good. Everything like there's a lot of love put into the actual martial arts in the game as well, so that's really cool. The only thing as I would say is make games maybe like a touch pricey. It's 30 quid, and it's on the Epic store. Considering you can probably beat this in about I don't know. I've done in 2 hours. I've beat the first level, so this is probably like a sub 10 hour game. So 30 quid is like definitely a decent asking price. But there's a lot, like I said, there's a good amount to play around with. I would imagine you can replay this game, trying to get your beat it at like an even lower age. So you know that it's got a level of replayability built into it. Plus, like the different certain moves that you can unlock actually are tied to certain ages. So if your first run you do really bad and you don't unlock any of the moves that you're allowed in the first like decade, so 20 to 30, then you can replay and try and unlock those moves. That's like an element of replayability as well for sure. But either way, the replayability is definitely like only going to appeal to people that really, really love the game. So, if this sounds like something you'll be into, I can basically guarantee you're in a safe pair of hands, really. This is a very polished product. So, yeah, if that sounds interesting to you, then feel free to pick it up. I'm having a fun time with it, and yeah, I'm excited to play more. Cheers for listening, everyone, and I'll see you in the next one, all right? Peace out, everybody.